I'm going to go ahead and get started because it's 11 o'clock and we're on recording here. So I just had a couple of things to talk about before we go into the State Fair main presentation. One of them was just a brief review of the new Claris announcements, the roadmap, so to speak. So Claris is kind of walking back some of the branding and technical decisions that they had made over the last year to switch over to a totally different stack of like having a Claris Pro, Claris Connect, and Claris Studio kind of separated. So what's happening now is that the FileMaker is the focus again, and FileMaker Pro, Go, and Server will be accompanied by Claris Connect and Claris Studio as like additions to the platform, rather than requiring a conversion to a .claris format file and a migration, so to speak, to a separate platform. So this is really good. This really simplifies things and makes it clear that FileMaker is not going to be replaced or discontinued anytime. It's going to be enhanced by these additional products, and of course, as Claris Studio grows in its capabilities, it can maybe do some of the things that you did in FileMaker in the past, but it's kind of a shared platform going into the future. So if you want to read more about that, you can go to that blog article. But I think this is really a positive thing for the platform and a simplification, and so that people will know that FileMaker is still the center of what the Claris platform is and is continuing to be enhanced. So the other thing to note is that there's the Claris Engage 2024 in February. It's going to be the first time that the whole Claris FileMaker community is getting back together in person, other than some smaller events like Pause on Air and things that have happened over the last couple of years. So that's exciting, but it will be a little bit smaller event than in the past. Like when there's been FileMaker DevCons, there've been usually around 1,500 people, and it's been at a resort hotel someplace hot in the summer. And so this is in the winter, but it's at an Apple facility, which is kind of interesting. And there's not really any other kind of event other than an Apple subsidiary, being Claris, that would be held at this, where you'd be able to see that. So I think they're limited by the amount of seating they have there. And I think the auditorium's around 600 people. So it's about less than half the size of the people they can accommodate. I don't know how they're going to handle ticketing, or like how you're going to be able to get those tickets or whatever, but we'll find that out soon. And it should be a great event. And then people will be staying offsite, and like there's 4 recommended hotels, which are about 15-20 minutes away. So something interesting. It's going to be exciting to have the community, the larger Claris community together again and soon. So today I'm Tim Cimbura. I didn't introduce myself. I'm the CEO and solution engineer at LuminFire, where we are today in Minneapolis. And I have with me today Jill Nathe, and we've been working together quite a long time, probably like 13 years or something, or more. You got to turn on the.
Oh, hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think 07, I think, is maybe around that time frame.
We started working together, and she is the competition's business analyst at the Minnesota State Fair.
Well, I want to correct you. Actually, I don't keep my LinkedIn up to date.
Okay,
so I have a much different title now. I'm actually a deputy general manager who oversees competition, agriculture, and education programming at the fair. But that's a really great picture you found of me.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
I like the picture. And I am 13 years younger, probably.
We have you here in person too.
I am here in person too. Here I am.
So we're going to kind of have a discussion together, and feel free to chime in but I put together a lot of slides, kind of talking about what the Minnesota State Fair is and how they utilize Claris FileMaker to make everything work. And so I think it's a really excellent case study of the power of the Claris platform. And so I will go right into that with the Minnesota State Fair logo. And I've got a short little video that's off the State Fair site that I'm going to play. So if you haven't noticed, then the Minnesota State Fair is kind of a big deal in Minnesota, and it's really more of an institution. It's been here for a long time, and a lot of people have it on their radar to go every year. In fact, the record was 2.1 million people in 12 days, which I think it makes it the largest state fair of all of them for the number of days. Is that
right? I think there's some in Texas that claim to be bigger, but they go more days and then they take days off in the middle and they don't open at 7 a.m. So we are definitely the biggest. And even if we weren't the biggest, we're the best. So that's really what matters.
So it's a big deal. And I found this slide about the Minnesota State Fair total attendance. And you can see it just going, it started in 1837 was the first time it was canceled, but because of the World Exposition. And then it was canceled a couple of times in the 40s because of World War II and the polio epidemic, and then never canceled all the way up until 2020 when with COVID. So it's back on track now. So I mean, it's kind of an interesting history of just the attendance. And so what is the state fair? There's a lot of different components that make it go together. It's like there's rides. We've got like the Sky Ride is a traditional thing that's there all the time. And then the Space Needle, these are permanent structures that are always at the state fair. You've got entertainment like jugglers and magicians. And so that's always been an interesting thing for me. I play piano at the Minnesota State Fair. No, not, well, just this one time. And then we've got food, of course, and the highest grossing food vendor at the Minnesota State Fair is the Sweet Martha's Cookie Jar, which everyone has to go there and get their bucket of chocolate chip cookies. And then you've got Pronto Pups and a lot of different other things. So I've got some slides there of showing the cookies, and the trick here is that you're supposed to bring a plastic Ziploc bag so that you don't lose the cookies off the top, or that you can take them home more easily. There's pretzels, there's Lego pretzel things. Sean was there demonstrating the corn
roast, yeah.
The corn roast, and things from Hawaii as well. At Hawaiian shaved ice. You've got things from Canada like the poutine, and one of my favorites is the poutine loaded tots. So those are really excellent. You get the gravy and the cheese all over the tater tots. And then I always go to Tiny Tim Donuts as well because it's my name. So
no Tom Thumb for him.
And the Pronto Pups, and then there's the whole thing about what's the difference between a Pronto Pup and a corn dog. And then everything on a stick. So you got pickles on a stick and all that kind of sort of thing. So this is all just introduction to what the state fair is. You've got the grandstand. So lots of different shows and national acts that come there, Earth, Wind and Fire and all the famous places, famous bands and such. And in the grandstand, There's also all these booths, and there's, of course, Spam, which is from Minnesota as well, and a magic shop and video games, and the only palm trees that you'll see in Minnesota are metal ones, I guess, like other than the conservatory. There's the butterfly tent. And then there's the whole eco place where Paul Bunyan happens to be there, and there's a little bit of LuminFire that was there because they were demonstrating a solar energy suitability app, which was developed by one of our people, Andy Waltz, and so that was really new and interesting, and that was the solar potential would decide or tell you, like, for any point in the state of Minnesota, what your potential for solar energy is on that rooftop, taking into account like shadows from trees and all that sort of thing. It was really very innovative and new. Okay, so now we're kind of getting into the FileMaker part of things, and I just have here like a piece of paper of one of the judging sheets. This is kind of like the old school. So Jill, can you just kind of give me an idea of how you did things at the state fair before FileMaker?
Sure. So we have to go way back in the time machine to how we did things. This is even, I would say this is updated because, to be honest, this report came out of a FileMaker database. Right. But prior to that, we when I first started, we were using something called DBase, which most people maybe haven't even heard of. And that was the bare minimum computing that we could do, and everything had to be entered, and the tables couldn't relate to each other. And we printed on dot matrix laser printers, and we did a lot of fun things with cutting things and spray mounting them to create 8.5 by 11 sheets that we could photocopy into our catalogs and our judging sheets and all the things. And then over time, we've made a lot of improvements. So this example would just be a judging sheet for our FFA crop show. And really, we've made a big change to that just recently. So that is actually, that was not that long ago. We were still doing it that way.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of photos of kind of the old stuff, but when we first started the automation, I remember going to the state fair and being given like 4 large boxes of like 200 different printed reports, and say, yes, this is all the stuff that needs to be in the computer at some point.
Yep.
And it was overwhelming.
It was overwhelming. And I don't think we fully understood how we could be more modular, because we were using a system that wasn't. Everything was very siloed and very separate. And so it took working with Tim and everyone at the time to kind of go, wait a second, the reports you're running for your beef cattle and your sheep and your swine, those all could be the same report with just some slight modifications. It doesn't have to live alone, and then everything has to be updated every single time. So that was a part of the revolution, was to go from, oh wait, this could all be in one thing, and it could do everything with just slight tweaks.
Right. And you can see that with the statistics of how many competitions, I mean, so this is all related to the competitions that happen at the state fair. 11,000 livestock and 5,000 competitions. It's just the numbers here that you have to take care of is significant. It's not like something, it's like, oh, I've got a sheet of paper with 3 competitions on it. No, there's a lot going on.
Right. And within each of these entries, there's a lot of data behind that. So for every livestock entry, you've got a lot of data about that animal, about the person bringing that animal, about who bred that animal, about registration information on that animal. So a lot of it is very deep. Some of the other things, when someone's bringing a quilt, you don't have to know that much about it, maybe a brief description. But for some of this, there's a lot of layers to the information we have to collect.
So you chose FileMaker early on. How did, what were the advantages of FileMaker that over?
Well, the way I remember it, it was the next best option. We knew we couldn't keep going with what we were going with. And you guys were already working with someone in our employment department. And so that was part of the turn on. And I would say too, that there are off-the-shelf products you can buy. There is a small market, back then even smaller, a small market that develops entry software for fairs all around the country. But But at that point, there was just one, and we would use it for parts, but it couldn't do everything we wanted to, which I think was a big piece of it, right? And we didn't want to have to fit our business into that product. And I think that's another key thing that we've been able to enjoy with FileMaker is we can keep tweaking it and twisting it and having it do crazy things, but it allows us to run our business the way we want to and not be forced to use some off-the-shelf software that isn't really going to work for us and doesn't let us modify and customize the way we want to.
Right. So this is a history then of when we started working together. And yeah, so the first database that I worked on assisting the state fair was an employee HR database where we were doing some integration to do some background checks of the people, because it's a very transient workforce. You know, people come in and they're working there for 12 days out of the year and maybe a little bit before and after. So you've got a lot of people coming through quick in a short period of time.
Right. You're trying to process. I mean, we hire around, 3,000 people a year that just work for those 12 days or just work seasonally. And then you've got even more people applying than that. So you just have a huge number of people coming through that you're trying to keep track of. And then you do want to track them year over year because you want to know where did they work the previous year and how did that go and that kind of thing. So, and that database still exists and continues to be enhanced and has had a lot of pieces added to it since it was originally built for that purpose.
So this is, I mean, so what the state fair uses FileMaker for is a kind of a huge scope. I mean, it's like a huge project. So what we decided early on was that we could, in 2008, let's just do the horses because that was enough to bite off as a project for a large scope. And if that was successful, then we could go ahead and automate other things in future years. So I've got some slides here just kind of showing what the horses are. And these competitions are in primarily in the large building, the Coliseum. So you see, you know, every person on a horse has a number and every horse is in there. So there's all kinds of different types of competition. This is the barrel.
The draft horse barrel racing.
Okay.
Yep. It's a very unique competition. You normally do not see those heavy horses attempting this. This is usually reserved for your Western horses, but about 7-8 years ago, kind of came up with this idea and the crowd loves it and exhibitors like to participate in it. It's kind of a fun, different thing and they've got horses willing to do it.
Yeah, and so you'll see this is part of the judging booth here. And that's so some of the, well, you'll see the iPads there in use, and I'll show more later. This is another competition with Percherons and
yeah, it looks like some Clydesdales, some Percherons. So it's one of the hitch classes.
Hitch, you know, so it's
8-horse hitch is the biggest class, the most horses we have hitched at any one time.
And then these are some of the awards that are given away, the ribbons and some other pictures. So, I mean, it's very impressive. You know, it's like if you've never seen a horse show before, this is an amazing horse show. And so there's a lot of components that go into the technology here. We're not just like, oh, there's a laptop with FileMaker on it. No, there's displays strategically placed throughout the different buildings where we wanted to see portions of the information, the data displayed for different audiences. So the audience is, I'm a person in the competition and I want to know when I'm up next. And, you know, so this display was showing you know, like what competition is coming up and when you should get ready in advance. And is quite, you know, especially for the time that we did this in the early or 2007, 2008, we were very much on the cutting edge of technology and starting to use the iPads and iPhones and things. So we set up Mac Minis in the Coliseum and in these various barns that were driving various displays, large screen displays 56-inch displays that are actually indoor, outdoor. So they've got their own air conditioner in the display. And then the large Jumbotron in the Coliseum. And so there's a FileMaker server in the cloud. There's a FileMaker server on site, talking to a web server. And then we were taking, and this continues to be this, that the website has its own database, and then that comes in to the FileMaker database through ESS, or it's because it's in a MySQL database. And then so that information comes in, it gets modified and updated for each of the competitions. There's a robot server that is constantly pushing things in different places, like for the display screens, and taking slices of that information off and making it useful in other places. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving pieces in this. And so we built ERDs, or entity relationship diagrams, for the majority of all of the things in the solution. And that helped us to know the relationships between the different tables and the fields, primary keys, and all those sorts of things.
The box of fun turned into something like this.
Yeah.
Which made a lot more sense then.
Right. So when you take all this paper, it's like, well, what things, need to be entities or things that we're actually tracking. We've got horse entries, we've got horse competitions, horse shows, horse results. Those are primary things, and they come in, the entries come in from off people actually entering them on the web, and then they have to be cleaned up and split out into the people and such. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, moving data around. And then this is what one of the screens on the website looks like, and then one of the screens here for the internal usage for the horses competitions. And you saw all those ribbons before. Well, we had to create tables of the different images of ribbons as well, like just the colors and things, so that they can be displayed easily, not only in FileMaker, but also on the website, or the results pages that were available. So here's another photo of the usage of the iPads then. So State Fair was one of the first large installations of when FileMaker Go became available, and made this possible. So FileMaker Go is the version of FileMaker client that actually runs on an Apple iPad. And so we were able to take advantage of that. And we had to make sure that we were not working in an offline area, but we had good Wi-Fi everywhere where we were going to utilize these, because we were talking directly back to the FileMaker server. And so that can be a challenge when you're in this large Coliseum. And, it's like in the past,
we had some issues initially with some of that access, but we've resolved all those since.
Yeah. Now it's pretty ubiquitous.
Yeah.
You can get good Wi-Fi pretty much.
Well, and to have done a better job on our side to get our network set up correctly and have a different network for this and for that. So we've come a long way with our IT as well.
Yeah.
But I would about the iPad, for us, that was revolutionary. That was a huge time savings. So what used to happen is they'd have to print out, we'd print out all these judging sheets. You'd take them to a show ring. And mind you, there are times during the fair, especially that last weekend, where we probably have 6 or 7 show rings. So we've got activity happening all over the place. And then you would sit and handwrite your placings in. The show would end. You'd have to come back up to the office, get on the computer, and now re-enter all that information that you just wrote down by hand, which not only wastes time, but also allows so much more room for error. So the ability to bring the judging sheet per se to the ring and be live in the system and enter those results as they were happening, with some of that additional validation that you have because you're using a computer to do it and not just writing on a sheet of paper. I mean, that was one of the more life-changing moments. I was just talking to a staff person who's worked for us for 20 years now. She got her 20-year pin this fair, and she was there at that time. And I said, "Do you remember, Sarah, when we sat down in the back after that first sheep show and went, we're done? Like, we don't have to stay another 3 hours and enter this information? Nope, we're done. We can run the proof sheet, we can check it, and it's over," right? Like that was big to bring the technology pieces together from Wi-Fi, et cetera, to the iPad, to FileMaker Go. To do that back in 2011 was a really big step for us.
And also for the people that are being judged, they would know whether or not they won the competition almost immediately, right?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of already know, but if things went well, it would roll up onto the screens that were somewhere in the barn.
But sometimes in the past, it'd take 2 or 3 days to get the results.
Yeah, it would take us a while to process them because you get them in and then you'd want to proof them, and you wouldn't want to post them on the website until you had them proofed. And so now it's much more, you can turn it around within that same day, where we now can put a report up on our website.
So these screens have pretty much not changed since that time.
Nope, we're still using your fun little icons.
So, and here's some more screens, and then displaying these results. So there's a website where people could just go and see the results on their iPhones themselves, or via a computer or whatever, without even needing to be in the Coliseum and seeing it on a screen displayed.
Yeah, and I don't want to break your heart too much, but so we don't actually use this anymore. Live streaming has become a thing. So we now contract with a webcasting company, and we use the screens to broadcast the live stream, and have found that because they are able to put some of those winners up on that, we don't actually have to run this anywhere anymore. But again, at that time in 2011, it was quite revolutionary, and to have that stuff on the screens and have it available to people in real time was a big deal.
So this is we wanted to make the solution as approachable as possible. So we wanted to be consistent with how the user interface was. And this, now as we are adding in new screens, we're kind of updating this a little bit with some of our newer standards, even going back in 2007, 2008, we had more shaded items. Now it's a little bit more flat and stuff, but you've got a main menu bar across the top with the idea that you can click on any item. Within 2 clicks, you should be able to get to almost any place in the app that you need to go. And then you've got some info in that first bar there that's kind of static, the things that you always want to see, and then tabs below that where you're seeing even more detailed information. And there's just a ton of data to look at. So there are a lot of tabs and things, but I don't know how else. I mean, we have this much data. You're trying to just make it accessible and easy to use. So that's one of the ways is through that kind of a standardized interface. So then the second year, after we put some of this into, so the iPads actually came in 2011. So that was a little bit later. But, I'm just going to show some of the cattle or the livestock. And what that looks like. Again, some screens. You've got real big animals, and there's the iPads being used there out in the ring.
There's Sarah right there. 20 years this year.
And so you had to kind of ruggedize the iPads to make sure that
yeah, I think at first we were nervous about that, and back in the day it was harder to keep them charged, and we have them all wrapped up, and I think we've relaxed some of that quite a bit nowadays.
Well, it's become so much. I mean, at that time, I don't think iPhones were really even.
Oh, exactly. Now, and that people are carrying around their phones and everything else, you worry a little bit less. Back in the day, it was like, oh my gosh, people are going to steal these, and how do we keep them safe, and where can we go to charge them? And
I remember that this large display screen, in the Coliseum, there was one time early on in the fair where we did have an issue with one of the Mac Minis that was driving that display, and you called kind of in a panic, and can you fix this? I happened to be at a Starbucks at the time, and so I remoted into that Mac, and I was making, and I was just, it was so bizarre. It's like, here I am in a coffee shop, and I'm controlling a display that's in the Coliseum, and people could see that. It was just kind of a strange moment of realization, but we got all that working, and things are good. So this is a screenshot of one of the iPad, kind of the newer looking ones. You can see it's got kind of more of a blue tinge and things, but trying to, with this interface down at the bottom, so you can click on a letter of the alphabet to easily get to another place, find a last name of somebody, or we're trying to make it as easy as possible to access the data quickly with strategic buttons or whatever on the iPad.
Yeah, and I mean, and just to that point, yet we have folks that have come back for 20 years, but we have new staff every year, and many of our staff that use the iPad are literally here for 12 days or less. We get some that are 4-day wonders, some that are 8-day wonders. So it does speak to the solution that we can have folks start and they can figure it out. Like it's pretty intuitive if they understand the business of what they're trying to accomplish. So like in this one, they need to find the person that's standing in front of them with their registration papers, click on that, and then see the animals that they need to register. And so I think it does speak to the solution that we are able to bring people in with really not a lot of training, and they kind of learn on the fly, and it still works for them.
Okay. I'm hearing that there's a question in the chat area here for us. Some people being it, let's say, outside of the horse event tracking, is FileMaker used for the fair app? Okay, so it's not used. There's a separate app that is used for like finding entertainment in the map and sort of the things that's just contracted out to a different group. But we have a lot of that same some of that information as far as locations and things is also in FileMaker, but not all of it.
But yeah, our stuff is used mostly internally. Not much of this would be external facing to a fair guest.
Yeah. Okay. So that, I think I addressed that. The public facing. Yep. And I had another thought. Oh, the other thought that was really interesting is after the first year that we took all of this business information, it's like a lot of it was in the heads of people that had been working at the state fair for many years, or or in those, like in the llama competition or whatever. There's a lot of specifics about how that competition works. So we had to take all the information out of people's heads and put it into business logic in FileMaker, which is very specific. And there was not a lot of trust that we did that correctly the first year. So what happened is that they did it all on paper and on the iPads for that first year. And then at the end, when everything matched, they said, okay, next year we can get rid of the paper and actually just use the computer.
Yeah. And I would say that my supervisor at the time had been burned before by solutions that did not work or things turned out incorrectly. And I think he was very wary to trust that this would work like it was supposed to and that things would match up. And he was a real numbers guy, still is. And he can spot inconsistencies or things that just quote unquote look wrong. Like you said, he knows it in his head and what these numbers should be. And so, yeah, he was very wary. So I think it was impressive back in that first year to have it actually come out the way it was supposed to and have things match up like they were supposed to.
Right. When I started programming and just doing in FileMaker work, I never knew that I would need to know things about sheep and poultry, and it was like which is one of the interesting things about working with FileMaker too, is that you get to work across all different industries. It's like, because it's a generalized tool that's made for building applications, and so it can work in any industry and in any situation, because it's just a tool. It's like that you build things with. So a lot of people look at FileMaker and say, well, FileMaker doesn't do this or whatever. And what they're actually talking about is that the solution that somebody built for them doesn't do that, because FileMaker can do anything given enough programming talent and the ability to build that into the solution that you have. And often people using FileMaker end up having a lot of technical debt because the solution that they've had, that they may have built FileMaker's been around for 30 plus years, or, it's like, if you built it 30 years ago and you haven't touched it or changed it, it's gonna have limitations. You have to give it love and update it on a regular basis to take advantage of the fact that business changes, things change. So, here in 2012, we're kind of getting up to there. We made the Megatron display, added some additional features. So again, adding new features to this every year. And then the solution took first place at the international,
It's the International Association of Fairs and Expositions. And every fall they have fairs from all over the country, world even, it is international, can submit some things that they've done at their fair it's really meant to show other fairs what's possible. A lot of times the best things you can do is borrow from another fair. It is a very unique industry. And so when we all get together, there's a lot of things we have in common that we don't with other folks. So it is exciting when you can show off something. And basically after that, I believe that a different company that now probably has most of the market on fair entries has had their own version of iPads and a lot of other things. So they did notice and stole some of our good stuff. But it's good. It's good. You want everyone to have that. And not everyone has the resources. The fair is very lucky to have the support and the resources to be able to build a custom system. Your smaller county fair or even some other larger fairs wouldn't be able to dedicate that kind of funding to it. Fairs are funded very differently across the country. Some are very much funded by their state governments, even their staffs are appointed that way. We are not. We are not funded by the government in any way, shape, or form. We earn our own keep, and then we take care of our grounds and put on that next fair. So we do feel very blessed that we have had support throughout to be able to do some of this stuff that's made our work so much better and us better able to serve our exhibitors and our fair guests as those expectations have changed.
So what would you say is like some of what has saved kind of like the most time or
Yeah, I think for sure I would go back to getting the iPads originally, and even now as we continue to use them, like you said, the biggest thing is how you can keep growing your solution. You don't have to get stuck with this is how it runs and you go, oh, well, we got a better idea and we can keep adding on to it. Even this solution itself, we have taken so at one point, I think I was managing about 30 FileMaker databases because we just like to build them and do things with them because they are great. It's way better than a spreadsheet. And slowly but surely, some of those have been integrated into our bigger solution. We still have others that are floating out there that we use for different purposes, but that's been a great piece as we continue to save time. So I'd say the two biggest ones were the iPads because it was not that data entry repetition. Another big one would say, so you saw a picture earlier of what looked like a little booklet, and we issue what we call premium books. And these are the books with all the rules and regulations and the list of all the classes you can enter. And this can be everything from creative activities, what are the different quilting categories, what are the canning categories, to your sheep show. And so it's the Hampshire sheep, the Suffolk sheep, and all that information. And a lot of it lived in the FileMaker solution already, but we were still updating books in like Word documents or in after that, I think it was Quark Publishing, and it was so tedious. And now that whole single source of truth became a real issue. You're updating it on the one hand in FileMaker for this purpose, but you're updating it on paper for this other purpose. So I want to say 2016, maybe, Sean, we did the work to take all that, and now we actually generate our premium books directly from the solution. So that has also been an incredible time saver, not to mention the other benefits that come with having that single source of truth, that if the class gets updated here, it's everywhere. That's where that information lives, and that information goes out in so many different ways. So that was probably the two big ones, I would say, where we really took that next leap. But every year we're tweaking it and making it better to, I think I've shared this multiple times with Sean or with Tim, if we spend 2 or 3 or 4 hours on something in January, that's going to save me time during August when I don't have time, that every time you do that, you've just saved yourself a headache or you've saved yourself time. And again, I think the expectations of people have changed as to what they want from us. And so to be able to turn things around or provide data in different ways. Another thing, like we talk about, so we have superintendents that are experts in their field. So like the person who runs our dairy cattle show is knowledgeable in the industry, and her job is to manage those exhibitors and hire the judges and do these other things. Her job is not to have to deal with the paperwork. So the idea is to be able to present her with the information she needs in whatever format she needs it in. And as we sometimes turn over superintendents and that, they have different things. Our younger superintendents want information in a spreadsheet, not in a bunch of paper PDFs. And so to be able to go into FileMaker and be like, okay, I just have to figure out how I'm going to export that data this way, and maybe create a couple new count or summary fields so that they can get their information the way they want, has also not just saved us time, but saved those folks time, because they're getting the information that they need in a format that works for them. And it's not a one size fits all. This is all we can give you.
Yeah. So the ability for the solution to evolve or change quickly is amazing. It's like we kind of lock things down before the fair, but in the whole year, up until that point, you have the ability to say, well, maybe we want to you can spend 2 hours automating something and it can save you hundreds of hours potentially in time that you used to have to manually edit those things or change things. So there's automation of processes. And you can't possibly define all of those things up front. It's just that you can think of them as things change, and the ability with FileMaker is that you can make those changes quicker than most other development platforms, and have them be almost immediately beneficial.
Right. If we had to submit all of our wishes, like we kind of used to some other software company, to say, here's all the things our change requests for the next version, like, that would be awful. It would be so hard to keep up and to do the things that we really want to be able to do.
And to have it absolutely focused for exactly the job at hand as well. It's like we started with horses because horses have different attributes than livestock, have different attributes than the static competitions. They're all very similar. But we needed to split them off into their own entities in order to account for the differences.
And it is, that is a double-edged sword. I'm sure people can relate to, right? Like on the one hand, it is really great that we can be very customizable and do everything that everybody wants, but sometimes you can burn yourself that way too. So you do have to be careful about sometimes saying, no, this is the standard way we're going to do this, and we're going to set it up in a way that is more modular, and everyone's going to use the solution in the same way. So there is that other side to getting too detailed to exactly somebody's needs.
So then the last set of competitions was the static competitions to automate, and this is a printout. There's some ideas for the future that we haven't even implemented yet.
Also true. We've talked for years, literally probably a decade, about how we could better automate, for instance, our creative activities area. So that's the canning and the quilting, and a lot of that still happens on paper. The front end is not, but then we print a lot of paper and a lot of paper tags, and that judging still happens on pieces of paper that data has to be entered. And so there's still room to continue to utilize the technology and the solution even further.
Yeah. And here the idea is, there's all these items in the competitions that when you go into this large building, how do you, let's say I want to find a particular item. Right now, it's kind of, you have a directory up front.
Well, we really don't. You really have to go to the half orange door and say, "Hey, do you know where this is?" Oh, yeah. Though it does, we do add. We have the winners listed there. That's what you're seeing there is the winners. But that's another piece that we've talked about, that comes and goes as far as prioritizing, right? Some years you have people who just are really cranky about the fact that they can't find their neighbor's bread. But you know what? If you don't know your neighbor's last name or exactly what kind of bread, it's a little hard to help you. And we pride ourselves in creative activities on the fact that our display cases are not like quilt, 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 quilt. And then you go to a different display case, sweater, 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 sweater. They're more themed. So you'll find a display case that has some woodworking and maybe some cross stitch and maybe something else that goes to a theme. So yes, that makes it a little harder to find, you know, grandma's dress that she sewed, but it makes for a much, much, much better display. But we have always talked on and off about whether or not there'd be a way to scan the tags as you put them in the cases, and then you'd have a way for people to look up where this item is or that item is. So that'll be out there for a little bit yet, but we'll see when that makes it to the top of the list.
Yeah, and when you're doing these things, you have to make it so easy to use that somebody who's brand new is able to utilize that technology. Otherwise, you know, that happens in a lot of technology implementations, that you get a great tool and then people don't even use it. They end up using their Excel spreadsheets anyway because they know how to operate that. And, you know, it's like, so we try to avoid that and make sure that the solution works. So these are just all kinds of static competitions, cookies and cakes and bars and things, and then agriculture. These I had to put my daughters in here. They kind of grown up with the fair. They do not look like anything like this today. But they enjoyed the being farm hands and seeing the butter sculptures and such when they were young. Oh, and then of course there's the giant slide at the state fair has nothing to do with FileMaker whatsoever.
But it is an icon.
But yeah, a couple more pictures here of some of the solution in different resolutions and different screen displays. And then another thing that happens when you have the tool FileMaker around, not only like you can prototype things and see how they work, and then maybe in a future year you build them into the main solution. Yep. and make it really well, is that you create additional databases to automate other parts of the organization or other departments quite often. So we've been talking primarily about all the competitions, but it started out with employees, and then in the last couple of years there are additional databases for vehicle tracking, and you know that was like checking in and out vehicles that are utilized at the fair, and making sure that you know where those items are and what you have. So that's a tracking kind of application. And then we did some work with the State Fair Foundation, because they have all kinds of data around people who donate towards, well, we did a whole new website for them, but also the FileMaker database tracks all of these benches that get donated. And each of the benches have some sort of wording on them, and then they get placed at different places throughout the fair. And so you need a geolocation on them so that you can track, you know, like when somebody comes to the fair and they want to know, oh, where's my bench? Well, you got thousands of benches all over the fair. So that's tracked in the database on the latitude and longitude, and so you can show it on a map and who donated it and when. And then there's these bricks that get donated also, so you can buy a commemorative brick that has a memory that's permanently in the ground at the state fair. And so that's also in a database. So many of these additional databases have got created in FileMaker to track all the other things. or not all the other things,
Yeah.
but many of the other things.
I think, again, it just speaks to, we're just such a unique organization, right? Like, who else has to keep track of 2,000 benches that get put away for the winter and then drug back out in the spring and spread over 300 acres of land? Like, that's random. There is nobody out there selling that system. So that's, I think, been another reason why the fair has seen so much potential in FileMaker. We do a lot of interesting things that nobody else does. And when you want to elevate what you're doing and find better ways to do it, you can find a solution often in FileMaker. Yeah, and the bench piece, I mean, that is a big deal. Every one of those 2,000 plus benches is donated in memory or honor of someone. So for folks who come out to the fair to find their bench, it's a big deal to know where that is. And it, previously could take a lot of time for someone from the foundation to try and figure out where the bench is, because they're color coded, but still there's only like 3 or 4 colors. And then there's a lot of ground to cover to try and find, you might know where it was one day, but also fair guests will pick them up and move them. So it's a big thing. So yeah, I think it is a reason that, even for us, we have lots of our own little databases. As the word in our offices, if you're doing that in a spreadsheet, you better come talk to me. Or if you're retyping, you better come talk to me. That's not okay.
So, I mean, if you did this, you could track these things in a spreadsheet, but then you don't get the ability to easily utilize the data in a different way, to have a different report automatically made from it, or an export of information, or, like, let's say you need to get all the email addresses of the people who donated or something. You've got them here and you can export them to some other area.
And that multiple people can have access at the exact same time and everyone's editing that same source of truth. I mean, I know people get into Google spreadsheets and there's other ways to do that maybe now that didn't exist, but there's really something to be said for the FileMaker solution on the server, that when everybody's accessing it, they're accessing the exact same thing, and anything that's happening is happening in real time.
And levels of security too, that you can have some things that are visible for a limited scope of users, and some that are only available to the admins. So, and then one of the most recent things is the camping area, and so this year I think was the first year that that's been put into FileMaker, and all the reservations for the I don't know how many camping.
I got to look to Abby for that.
243 spots, and a lot of people want them. And so we've kind of put together a map of when they're used by who over the different days, because you have people in those spots that may come and go as well. So it's a lot to track, and having a database or a custom solution that would help out with that, big help. Yeah, I mean, we have both used something called Campground Master, was the oh gosh, what is that even built on? Like some weird Windows thing, to try and, because the competitions also runs a campground for our exhibitors. And so it kind of started there, where we were like, is there any way we could get this into this format? Like we were always taking in our information into FileMaker from a web form, but then we would have to export it, I know it's painful, and drop it into this other solution in order to do the mapping and to figure out what belonged where and how to not overlap dates. And so there again, a revolution for us was to have that grid within FileMaker, one-stop shop. You do it, they're moved, and it's everywhere and it's clear to everybody. And so we even can have someone work on that remotely, which has been a tremendous asset. And there aren't probably a lot of campground solutions that are designed for this exact kind of use case. Exactly. We have had meetings with multiple campground companies. You'll see them at our event at the International Fairs and Expositions. They'll have something in the trade show booth, and you'll talk to them, but they can't make it work. So like in our case, we have like encampments where we need them to come and stay for X number of days. And, there's just elements to it that just aren't out there. And to try and, again, fit your situation into something like that just doesn't work. So, I don't know if you have this on your desk, but we generally, from some of our favorite clients, we make a Lego. I've never seen this. Oh, you didn't see this? No. Or if I have, I don't recall it. Okay. This is anyway, awesome. Yeah, that's you. And then the Sean over there. I'm behind the computer there. So That's just kind of fun. I think that's the end of the slides that I have. I don't know if there are any questions or things anyone wants to ask. You can put them in the chat, or do you have any additional thoughts that anything we didn't cover?
Nothing's jumping out at me. She was asking if what we see for expansions and directions we want to go. And I would say, yeah, I think a couple of things that we touched on we do have some areas that are still doing a lot on paper, especially around those static entries. So it would be exciting to get some of that into either the iPad or whatever, such that we're that data is getting right into the system and then able to be used in a lot of different ways. There's a lot that even happens after that that's all very papery. That would be nice to be able to email information out to those exhibitors and what have you. Trying to think, Aaron, what's kind of on our radar? A lot of it sometimes is smaller tweaks, but they make a big difference. And sometimes it's stuff that is outside of our control. So something will change with how we have to do our shows or what have you, and then we have to tweak the solution to work with that.
One of the things we didn't mention was that FileMaker actually generates all the checks, correct?
Yep. So another big piece, I think it was kind of in one of your years, it kind of briefly mentioned checks. So yeah, part of what happens is they win, and then part of it they get their placing, and then with their placing they get money, and then the money has to be issued in a check. And to have integrated that into FileMaker was another big step, because again, now we weren't trying to move data from one system to another system, and it's all internal there. So yeah, and then interestingly, again, like our department does print its own checks. So we don't just send a file over to our finance division. So we print about 5,000 checks worth. Well, this year it'll probably be close to $2 million, just right out of our solution there. So all those little things, Micker, who knew that was a thing? And you got to have the right font installed on your computer, and then all those different pieces that you need in order to issue proper monies. And who knows, maybe someday we'll just be issuing some kind of credits to their Venmo or something. I don't know. I mean, we've talked about that before too. So it is, again, being able to take advantage of what's out there and what people are comfortable with. And
at some level, you have to go to the lowest common denominator of what everybody has or whatever in order, it's like, because some people could have Venmo accounts, but then you got to still, 70% of them could be paper checks still or whatever.
I think another great integration we've seen both, I think the employment side and we've done it in our contract side is with DocuSign. That's been a really great one, as we are able to turn things around so much faster. We issue contracts. All of our judges are considered independent contractors. So it used to be a lot of mailing of papers and W-9s and waiting for them to come back and all that. And so that move to be able to export that data and have DocuSign send it out and get it back. There's more we could do there, but even the little bit we've done has been a big help.
Good. Well, I want to thank you for coming in and being here physically in person too. It's great, and we have people all over the world potentially that tune in now to this CPUG. We're calling it CPUG, Claris Platform User Group, because FileMaker at one point was going to go away, but now that we know that name is still here to stay, FileMaker is still part of the Claris platform. So you got it's easier to say CPUG than it is to say FileMaker's Connect Studio platform group or whatever. So, but thanks to Jill.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting us. I'm impressed that we're here and alive. A week and a half out. Had some good sleep now.
Yeah.
But it's a fun time to talk about it. And, for us now we'll turn right into, okay, what can we do for next year? What do we have the budget for? What are our priorities? And that's exciting too, I think, to see and what other opportunities are there at the fair to utilize FileMaker.
Well, thank you. And so if you were here, you would be able to have pizza, but Otherwise, you have to go out and get your own pizza because you're not at our office here. But well,
Tim?
Yes.
Hi, this is Eleni online. There's a couple of questions that we had in the chat, one from me and one from somebody else.
Okay. Oh, I see. The authentication methods you use for a tool like this. How do you get the right people the right access? We can answer them. The majority of this is authenticated just using the FileMaker standard security. So anyone who has access to this, which is a limited number of people because it's people that work for the fair.
Yeah, anybody with access is going to be an employee.
Yeah. So they have their own accounts.
Are you using some sort of like authentication, like Active Directory or something, or are you all having to make manual local accounts for everybody every year?
In this particular solution, they're all local FileMaker accounts. Again, it's like the fair isn't because of, well, most of the people that are in this database are longer term employees of the fair, correct? Or
yeah, I mean, anybody logging in is going to have been issued a login from myself or maybe from Aaron, and we do try and go through and, you know, clean up past interns or whoever that's not going to be back. And, you know, I guess I don't know how anyone would log into it from anywhere else. They pretty much have to be on campus with. And then, yes, there's also different privilege sets within the solution. So, you know, so for instance, we have gentlemen that are down at the cattle show and they do check-in on the iPad. So as the cattle are lining up under the archway, they're marking which ones are here and they're tracking that in the iPad, which is much, much better than having to do it on a paper catalog that might be old and not have the right information in it anymore because of animals that scratched or whatever. Anyway, so those gentlemen have a different level of access because all we want them to see is that particular layout with that particular information versus a summer intern who might have a different level of access versus a full-time person who's got a different level of access. And so, yeah, that's another way that we would manage, I guess, that piece
so
of it.
Those are standard FileMaker security levels and the accounts that they log in with. Yeah,
Sure.
And then Matthew Dahlquist is asking about the platform or service that the fair is using. So the fair actually has a couple of FileMaker servers on site that they're utilizing. And then we have hosted in a cloud, a backup server and also a testing or development server. So yeah, the IT department at the state fair is very friendly towards FileMaker. And so certainly we could have put everything in the cloud, but there's some advantage to having it on site there for speed and stuff. So
on-prem for security as well. This is Jim from the IT here.
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
I made it.
Good to have you here. Did you have any comments or things that you wanted to point out?
No, I just the transportation database you built for us, I think 7 years ago now.
Okay.
That our transportation department uses pretty heavily during the 12 days of the fair, or they start before, but during the 12 days specifically. Yep. And then we keep all of our stuff on-prem for security purposes. So, and as well. And then usually use all the security built into FileMaker and not connect it to an LDAP as another security layer, so that the departments that need to use the database are the ones that are in control of who can access their data.
Good. I think those were the only questions that people had. So I'm going to try and keep us on time here. We're only a few minutes beyond our thing, but thanks so much everyone for joining and watching, and have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.